Hello again, everybody. Welcome to Module 4 again. We're talking about surveys. We are continuing our discussion on non-experimental methods. Last time we did observational methods, and now we're going to be talking about some of the more complex areas of surveys. Now, I really do believe that the best way for you to understand the complexities of a survey is to try to create one yourself, and we will be doing that. But basically, I wanted to tell you that a lot of times people think that surveys are a pretty easy way to do a study. I mean, you just put some questions together and give them out, right? Well, there are lots of things that we have to consider. Surveys are very, very convenient and easy to give out, but they are very, very hard to make well. So here are some of the things that you need to be concerned with. Issues, concerns, things that you need to be aware of when you are creating a survey. So first of all, we need to be concerned with question wording. How are you going to phrase your questions? You want to really avoid two things in particular: leading questions and double-barreled questions. So what's an example of a leading question? Well, if I say something like, should taxes of working people really be used to assist welfare recipients? And you can answer yes or no. Clearly you can tell what my bias is and what I'm trying to get you to say. Because I'm like, should they really be used to, welfare as opposed to poor? I've chosen lots of words that sort of reveal my bias. So that's an example of a leading question. A double-barreled question is a question where you ask two questions in one, but only allow for one response. So you don't know which question they've actually answered. And it's really amazing how easy it is to do this if you're not careful. So, for example, you might ask a question, do you think students need more experience in school with critical thinking and computer technology? Yes or no? Well, if they say yes, which one are they talking about? Both? Do they have to agree with both? If they say no, does that mean that they don't think that they need either? It's a bad question because of that. So be aware of those two things in particular. And it's really hard because our own biases go into the way that we word our questions. So especially the leading questions, words that we choose, we have to be very careful. Try them out on your friends, see how they feel emotionally about the questions, read them yourself, take your own survey, all those kinds of things to get the perfect survey. Okay, so question wording is extremely important. You also need to keep in mind that the phrasing should be at about an 8th grade level of reading level, so don't be using perspicacious or something like that in your questions. Another thing to be concerned about is your question order. If you start off asking a really personal and invasive question, like the first thing, you're going to shock your participants and they're not going to want to continue. Or they're going to be embarrassed, and that's going to influence their mood throughout the entire survey. So you want to start off with positive questions and move towards more sensitive items later on. But you don't necessarily want to end with them, because then you're going to have participants who are upset at the end. So you might want to embed them close to the middle, sort of down lower towards the end, with a few other things like demographics, gender, race, religion, etc. at the end, because that kind of diffuses a little bit of that tension. Participants always have the right to refuse to answer any question, but you want to be systematic in the way that you put your items, because you don't want to shock them right away or upset them or change their mood in any way that's going to influence future items. And it's the same thing with scales too. Even if you're not creating your own items, if you're using Rosenberg's self-esteem scale and an anxiety scale, which one do you put first? If you put the self-esteem scale first, that might influence how they respond to the anxiety scale, and vice versa. So you need to think about those types of issues when even if you're using other people's surveys. Which one goes first? So order is extremely important. See if there's anything else I can think about that is important. I think that's, one more thing. Shorter questions are better. You want to make sure that you don't go on and on and on and have a lengthy question. I think I didn't actually write that down up there, but make sure that you are quick and to the point, but clear and not double-barreled or leading. Okay, so we talked about question wording, question order. Now we're going to talk about open or close-ended questions. This is really one of the first questions you should ask yourself, but it's directly related to response scales and what we were talking about earlier with levels of measurement. What kind of response do you want from your participants? Do you want them to write you a text that you are going to look at the themes of more of a qualitative type study, where you say, how do you feel about politics in the United States? Question mark. And they just fill it in, and they can tell you as much information as they want. You get lots of detail, but then it's up to you to figure out how to make sense of that data. And there's a lot of personal interpretation that goes in with that. Now, so the question itself may not be so difficult to create, but the analysis and is much harder with a qualitative open-ended question. A closed-ended question, preferred by most psychologists again, demands lots of upfront wording and order and all those things, but we tend to have a closed-ended question is one that controls the response that the participant can give. So you give a yes/no answer, or you give them a scale from 1 to 10 or from 1 to 5, and we'll talk about that in a second, regarding how how many numbers you want to give them to respond. Do you have them do a checkbox, check as many things as they want? Really, it depends on the level of measurement you want. If you have them doing a yes/no or a checkbox thing, that is a nominal level variable. And all you can do with that is to count frequencies. And that's not as impressive, and we can't do as many things with that as we can with an interval or ratio scale. So I like the Likert type scales, which are those 1 to 5 scales, where 1 is completely disagree, and 5 is completely agree, and 3 is neither agree nor disagree, neutral. And then the other ones don't necessarily have to have words or anything attached to them. They're simply a continuous scale. Participants, I think, generally understand that. They don't have to have a label for each response. And then you can take an average, and then you're golden. You can do all kinds of fun statistics that we're going to learn about next module. So open-ended or closed-ended questions, you get a lot more rich data this way. But here, it's a lot easier to analyze. And it's not just lazy, it's just a completely different way of doing research. Again, most psychologists are quantitative, and therefore we like the closed-ended questions. We may ask additional, do you have any other thoughts, and then have an open-ended question and see if that will inform future surveys. But those also will probably be closed-ended. But you need to make up your own mind about what you want, and we'll practice both in class. So once you've decided that you want a closed-ended question, not that you have, but if you decide that you want a closed-ended question, that was a leading statement, you need to decide what type of response scale that you want. Do you want yes, no, like I said, because that's nominal. Do you want the 1 to 5? That's interval, and so you can take the mean. But another thing to consider is the width of that response scale. Do you want participants to have 1 to 100? Does that help them? Maybe it's a little overwhelming. Trying to go all the way from 1 to 100 might be a little much. It might not be. It might be, if you think in terms of percents, how much percentage do you believe or agree with this statement, might make sense to them, but it might be too much for other people. 1 to 5 is a good safe bet, because you have a midpoint, and you tend to have a couple of spaces either direction to show that you can be extreme. If you only have a 1 to 3 width, you can either be neutral or agree or disagree, and there's nothing in between. So it's really minimizing the participants' ability to show how extreme their attitudes or thoughts and feelings are. If you make it too wide, it's too much information usually. 1 to 9 is a good one. Again, you have a midpoint, and you can show lots of variability there. People like to live in one or the other areas of the scale. Typically, it's called a response bias, specifically a response set. You know who you are. I'm kind of the same way. You either like to circle the extremes and be way out there. I'm an 8 or a 9 every single time. Or I like to hover near the center. I don't want to commit too much to either, but I might just a little bit this way or that way. And some people simply just go straight down the middle every single time, and some people just extreme every single time. So those are response sets, and those are kind of a limitation of surveys. But anyway, those are some things that you can consider when you're thinking about the width of your scale. If you have 1 to 9, if those people are really circling 9 every time, you can see there might be a response set going on. Whereas if they're just circling 1, 2, or 3, you don't know if they're just agreeing with a lot or if they are being extreme about it. You can't get that information from that small scale. On the other hand, it's quicker for the participants to respond to. Okay, so that's the width of the scale. And another question is, do you want to use a midpoint? I personally like the midpoint because I personally do believe that in most cases there is a neutral answer that should not force participants to go either yes or no at all. They simply should be allowed to say, I don't have an opinion, which is different than I refuse to answer or I don't know. That should be a different response that you allow them to have outside of the response scale. Some people and some variables really do demand that participants sort of, make a decision. Essentially, there's no midpoint. It's a 4-point scale, and you either feel this way a little bit or you don't. But either way, that tells me that you're a little bit more or less extreme, but you go one way or the other, and you're not allowed to say you don't care or you don't know or you're not in the middle. Sorry, different. Don't know is different, but you're not. You just have no opinion. You're not allowed to say that on certain things like self-value, self-worth. Most of us feel either a little bit good or a little bit bad or a lot good or a lot bad about ourselves. Very few people have a completely neutral view of themselves. And so the Rosenberg self-esteem scale is a 4-point scale. They don't want you to sit there and say, I have no opinion about myself. They want to push you one direction or another, so there's no midpoint. So it's up to you to decide what is your variable of interest, what is it, what is necessary. Do you want to push them, and it's called sort of a forced choice, or do you want to give them more latitude with respect to that neutral point? So we've talked about some of the things that you should be concerned with when you're creating a survey, and again, the best way to do it is to try it and see just how challenging it can be. Limitations of self-report data, which is what surveys are, is a response bias. As I mentioned, the response set, living either near the center or to either extreme, just being difficult and disagreeing with everything, or being really enthusiastic and agreeing with everything. But we also have a bias to impress the experimenter, be what we think they want us to be, or say what we think is socially desirable. That's called the social desirability bias. So that might be a problem, and that's related to how honest our responses are. Participants can be dishonest in their responses because they are embarrassed or ashamed or just don't feel like being honest, or because they feel like the experimenter or the researcher wants them to do something else, to say something specific, or they may be dishonest because they really don't know themselves. If you ask them to reflect on themselves, they may not be able to do it very well. And so there's always that problem with a retrospective self-report, just thinking back to your past or thinking about yourself, reflecting on yourself. Sometimes people just don't have access to that information. They make their best guess. That's why the observational studies are good, because you actually see what they do, not just what they think they would do. Another thing is sampling. It's really important to get a representative sample that will represent your larger population to which you want to generalize your results. Ideally, everyone in the world, but we're not going to get that. We would be lucky to say everyone in Florida, or all college students in Florida, or maybe all St. Leo students, or maybe all St. Leo Center students, or whatever it might be. It's very limited, our ability to generalize, because we usually do not use random sampling, which is the best representative sample, where everyone has an equally likely chance of being selected. But we rather use typically convenience sampling, which means whoever is available and there and ready and willing to do it. And then there are, of course, some selection bias things there. I always fill out surveys for people because I know how hard it is to get data, and that says something about me. The people who decide to do your survey are different from the people who just delete it as an email or say no thanks. So there are issues with surveys that are difficult and are problematic, but because they're so convenient and you can get a lot of really good information from them, and you can find lots of reliable relationships in spite of all those things, it's good to have a survey, and also maybe to use a different method like observation or even an experiment to see if people are saying what they're actually going to do, and see if that matches up. All right, well, I will see you next module. We're starting statistics next time, guys. Looking forward to it.